So David said that why am I so concerned about the rate of profit? You can see that the end of where we are now, he points out there's huge profits being made in this tiny number of firms who just so happen to have, the Microsofts, the Googles, and so on, who have, as he implied, tremendous technological capacity, ability to innovate, and so forth. So for them, high rates of profit because there's no competition. What I wanted to emphasize, though, is the way in which the rest of the productive heartland, so to speak, of the United States has been hollowed out precisely as a result of downward pressure on the profit rate as a result of one after another entry of lower cost manufacturers, and in particular, the implementation of these global value chains, which David quite rightly focused on. What are these value chains? It's easy to understand them because it's very much like Marx did that analysis of manufacture and detailed labor, and talking about the way in which tasks that had formerly been craft tasks are now divided up into their component parts. And the advantage of dividing those tasks up into its component parts, when you had an artisan producing all of it, then you had to pay everybody at that artisanal to do this at an artisanal wage. But if you can divide the tasks in a craft object, but you're talking about a whole range of manufacturing outputs. What you're ending up doing is what David said, but what you're doing is putting incredible pressure on the rate of profit. So you not only have these ever cheaper productions occurring, because people come in with low wages and they can adopt a lot, if not all, of the technology, and effectively more and more they're able to adopt. But then you have the global value chain, which allows an even more effective way of essentially distributing manufacturing overcapacity on a world scale. And what that has meant is what David said, but it didn't happen the way it's sometimes talked about, like a plan of American capital to essentially divide up the world in this way. The way it happened was intense competition in which the U.S. manufacturers could not compete. And that's why you have why I keep looking, forcing people to the rate of profit, diddling around or jumping up and down. Why? It's because there was this continual downward pressure on the rate of profit that bit by bit the U.S. as a result, and it didn't happen smoothly, it happened through a series of crises, because the overcapacity is, you can deal with it for a while, and then you have the crisis. So what's going on is where I agree very much with David, is in the outcome. But you need to see what drove the outcome. And this is crucial for understanding China, and it's crucial for understanding Trump. Because what has happened, and it's also crucial, above all, to understand what David ended up with, this nexus of power, government power, and finance. This is the heart of the beast. Why? Because the result that David is describing, and I agree with, is to push out profitable production out of the United States. And you have, of course, a small a small group of incredibly successful and highly ultra-competitive. But then for the rest, where do you invest? How do you make money? The answer, what people have always have said, to make as productive capital cannot make profit. Sometimes people have thought actually finance can come in and make a profit. Finance can't make a profit without being able to connect, to tie in to actual production. So what David is talking about is what I was trying to talk about as well. And that is that the ruling class, so to speak, today is hugely dependent on finance, yes, but that finance's profit depends on the alliance with the state. It depends on almost like a feudal privilege. It's so far away from what we thought we knew about capitalism. So Trump is in a tough bind, because if we understand the response to that moving out of manufacturing, it's this financial sector that's subsidized, and then all these forms of handing money to the same people, tax cuts and so on. Those were the first things you saw in Trump. You had, they're calling for the end of, not Glass-Steagall, but Dodd-Frank. They're calling for more tax cuts. This is the heart, it remains the heart of the matter. And so then it seems to me that what is being revealed is that lack of alternative for them. Now, they would like to see the development of manufacturing through protection and through this demand.
Infrastructure demand,
yeah, but it will be so expensive in terms of American elite, American capital, because what it means is that it prevents. They're going to prevent imports, for example. Now, with the commodity chains that David talks about, they're almost up to, they're just about short of these super high-tech companies. So for the super high-tech companies, what they're for is the freest of trade, because they need to import all of that, right? And so they're up a creek. What I'm trying to say is Trump is up a creek, because every piece of the policy that he's proposing, if to the extent it's a populist policy, is going to hit at this form of organization of capitalism, in which the U.S. produces these high-end things and imports the rest, and imports it cheap, and therefore has free trade, and it even has a high currency, so it can buy all of that. So you have the financial sector supported by the state, you have just redistribution, tax cuts, and then you have not protection, but the opposite, super opening. So this is what Trump has. Trump could move in that direction. He could protect, and then he could subsidize demand. And the problem then, perhaps, if he did it big enough, and created a big enough fortress America, there wouldn't, when they stimulated the economy, they wouldn't pull in, stuff from Asia and stuff, which was what they had done before. They will, be able to keep that here. But what's going on is you're talking about an economy that's really a statist economy, of course a right-wing statist economy, but in this moment it's developing against the totality of that neoliberal elite that has built up in this period as a result of international competition, falling rate of profit, and then this political neoliberal thrust. And that political neoliberal thrust is what's making Trump popular. But now he's here, and what is he going to be able to do with it? I just say one thing. I'm very dubious he can do any of this, because he has no real apparatus. He has no real party to do it. His mode of success was this tremendously demagogic thing in which he actually, in a passive way, organized millions of people. He didn't organize them into a party. He didn't organize them into any sort of institution that could possibly, when they win, impose these kind of policies. Think maybe Le Pen in France, where they've had the National Front for years and years and are building up an alternative. And it's conceivable, I'm sure, they're just terrified in France right now about them winning. Because if they win, there could very well be a huge attack on the neoliberal economy, of course, in the name of anti-immigration, racism, and so on. So I'm dubious that Trump can do this. He could do it technically. Technically, I think that way is open. But I think every time he tries to do something that isn't benefiting, Goldman Sachs and hiring a Goldman Sachs guy to get rid of regulations, or more tax cuts, or keeping actually funds coming in for the greatest tech people in the world, I think he's gonna come up against it. And I think the easier path is to not just sort of slide out from actually doing that.
I'd like to ask a question.
Yeah, let's take some questions. I do agree that Trump's problem is that he's really a globalizer masquerading as a non-globalizer. So there's a moment of truth coming there. That's how I think
that is.
Okay. So I'm just a regular person. I don't know economics or anything like that. I don't know. I find neoliberalism offensive. I don't know what it really means, but I find it offensive. But anyway, I just want to understand. Clinton gave to Bush a balanced budget. We had great debt, but a balanced budget. Then came Bush, and then he decided to spend all this money. So, I mean, how is that, so that's increasing the debt. So it didn't have to be increased, and it didn't have to put us in such a mess. And so then came the 2008, and then we bailed out the companies. Okay, and we were willing to go into more debt. But we were willing to give the money to the top 1% in tax cuts instead of putting it in the infrastructure. So this is a political decision, not that an economic decision, to increase the debt and not really give it to the people. So, government has a certain amount of responsibility, and I don't think that they were responsible. Then we bailed out the banks, and then they weren't willing to bail out the people. They could have renegotiated the mortgages and all that, but they didn't do that. So it's like make middle class go down, down, down. So it's not a question, to me, these are choices that government can make to make our lives better. And they decided not to do that because they had the power, they were Goldman Sachs, I really don't know. But the government had choices, and we didn't have to be in such debt. We didn't have to go into a war that didn't get paid for. We didn't have to get the drug policy without being paid. We should have paid as we went. And couldn't have our economy survived very well without being in such debt.
Yeah. I think we all agree with certain that view. Shall we just go? Let's go this side.
I have a question.
I have a few questions for sure, not to come back to us.
Please.
About what you were discussing before the question. The horizon of much of the left seems to be remain on the question of income inequality. So the Bernie Sanders movement wants to raise the minimum wage. And I wonder if that is not just a strategic mistake, because even if distribution were equitable, there would still be the relation between capital and labor, but an actually impossible proposition if the economy is propped up in the private sector and the service economy and financialization. Is it even possible to return to a state of affairs where the state guarantees a certain living wage and certain services, and capital is taxed at a higher rate and CEOs make less, etc.? Because all of that was predicated on and made possible by production growth, which we all agree has slowed, except in, as David says, China.
Yeah.
I mean, would it even be possible for Sandra's to?
David or Bob?
No, but I think we should get some more.
Yeah,
No,
let's
okay,
get some more.
Please.
Okay. This question is for Robert Brenner. It seems to, given the framework of the fund rate of profit and taking into account that the economy has been sluggishly growing thanks to economic bubbles in the last.
It was, then the bubbles burst.
Exactly. So there's just a given amount of distance that can be between real economy and artificial or fictitious economy. So I get the sense of when I hear you talk that the way out is socialism, but the question I ask myself is, within capitalism, is there a way, like, there's a very wide notion that the Great Recession, the Great Depression, was solved through the Second World War and the destruction of capital and the war economy. So is there the possibility, do you see the possibility of engaging in a war as a way out of the crisis, and what the consequences would be for the population? But I mean, a more full-fledged involvement in war, and if that would involve civil population, not just, it's not that it's a minor thing, but the impact that drones war have on the population is much different, and in terms of encouraging popular uprising and resistance.
Thank you.
My question is for Professor Harvey. I was really interested, you were talking about these social movements in which the working class is not the central actor, like the uprisings in June of 2013 in Brazil. And I'm in the urban education department, and last week we had a Skype with students from Brazil who are occupying their schools. There's, over 1,000 high schools and universities that are occupied. And one of the things that they said was the need for unity with the working class, because they said, you can imagine if there were 1,000 factories occupied, they would be in a different situation than 1,000, high schools and universities occupied. So I'm wondering what you see as the role of the working class in this new capitalist configuration that you described.
Let's take that lot, no? You want to start?
Okay. So these three questions, they're kind of hard. The one that I find relatively easy, and I shouldn't boast, but I have a very close relative younger than me who organizes service workers, and I was talking to him about this problem of can the capitalist economy actually, given the pressures of profitability, can it actually afford to raise wages significantly for these, in these low-wage sectors? And I've been thinking about it since Aaron kind of argued with me about it, and I was saying, of course, they could deal with a few dollars. But then I thought about who is in the service sector, meaning the capitalists in the service sector. And they're like an extreme version of like the manufacturers we talked about around the world, who are being pressed by new people, because it doesn't take much to enter those lines. You don't have to have much capital, you don't have to have much skill, you have to have not much anything. And so what that means is because it's so easy to enter, there's a tremendous tendency to overcapacity. They don't have high rates of profit. And they're very worried about this kind of business. I think it's, again, I think it's really talking about the bind that this economy is in that it has so much seeded any, productive dynamic. Because usually services would be supported by workers who who are getting higher wages in other sectors, and demand would rise, and because you have, say, competitive manufacturing, something like that. So I think it's whoever, the gentleman who raised that question, I think is raising a very good question, and to me, it's about, in the end, say we were talking about a socialist alternative, what would a socialist alternative actually look like when you're sort of starting from scratch, when you're starting from such a low level of living standards and productive capacity. Now, on the question of the war, I tend to have some doubt that was even the way out of the Great Depression, because what initially drove, the war in the sense of demand was what pulled the economy out of it. I hate to say it, but that seems to me the case. That gigantic government demand, in part to build the arms, of course, that created the employment to create the further pent-up demand to drive the economy. I'm not so sure that it was necessary for there to be, quote, destruction of capital in Europe to make this all possible. In a way, it made it easier to enter, for them to enter in with new technology. But I'm very uncertain that this, was, like, I'm trying to think of today, what would good exactly, maybe somebody could fill that out to me, what good a war would do for us at this point, how it would recover the conditions for productive investment. I just don't necessarily see it. I guess you could say the overcapacity would be destroyed. I'm quite incoherent on this point, as you may have noticed.
David,
you would ask
point.
Yeah, look, worker movements are far more likely to be successful when they have a great deal of support from neighborhoods and population. Almost every successful labor struggle I know has that quality to it, and I think the same is also true of the social movements. Of course, because of the structure, the social movements, there are varieties of them that are not in my backyard, from very rich people trying to keep developers and people who look like you and me out, so I think we shouldn't kind of say all social movements are good, but then there's some pretty bad unions as well, so the politics of it. But for me, the ideal situation is one in which you put together both the power of stopping things in the workplace and stopping things in the living space. I think we saw some of that power mobilized, for instance, in the immigrant rights movement back in 2006, when people just didn't go to work, but they also shut cities down. So I think it's very, very important to try to build coalitions. But you have to understand that the capital-labor relation, which is the foundational relation which you're dealing with on the employment side, is very different from the buyer-seller relation which exists in the realization moment, which is very often the center of the movements, the social movements, which are, say, anti-gentrification or something of that kind. On the concept of socialism, I think there are steps to be made. For example, why is it that all these people around right now are so desperate to privatize Social Security? It's very simple, because Social Security does not catch us in debt peonage. It's a pay-as-you-go system. And I would make the argument that we should get rid of all private pension funds, and we should substitute in its place a national program in which everybody, when they get to 65, has a guaranteed income. I mean, something of that kind would be a socialist proposal, which would actually get us out of saying, oh, I'm caught in this dilemma about, how am I going to guard my pension fund, sort of thing. So there are ways to start to think about each one of these elements, and of course, decommodification. I think this audience, probably all of you agree that there should be decommodification of education, decommodification of healthcare. At some point, I think the decommodification of housing becomes terribly important, because we've got a crazy situation right now in housing, where there's a massive amount of building going on with the crisis of affordable housing. Because all of the building that's going on is for the upper classes, not necessarily to live in, but for the upper classes to invest in. We're building cities for people to invest in, not decent cities for people to live in. And you kind of go, this is an incredible waste of resources. I mean, look around, just go around, look at what's being built here. And then they come up with this crazy affordable housing kind of scheme where 20% have to be for people earning less than $80,000 a year. 20% of the units have to be less than $80,000 a year. Well, half the population of New York City is trying to get by on $30,000 a year. So that affordable housing is essentially lower middle class housing for teachers and assistant lecturers and people like that. So we've got this insane. I mean, and look at the forms. And this is, by the way, is going on in every city I know in the world. You go to Mumbai, you see kind of fantastic buildings going up in Mumbai in the midst of kind of a crisis of affordable housing. You see the same in Chile. You see the same in Sao Paulo. You see the same in Nairobi. You see the same everywhere. And a lot of these places are not lived in. They're simply invested in. Or if they're lived in for maybe 2 weeks a year when somebody comes here, an Arab sheikh comes here to shop for a couple of weeks, I mean, this is an insane use of resources, misuse of resources. So there are many things that can be done, it seems to me, kind of saying, well, okay, we're going to really cut out all of that stuff of people buying houses. But this goes back a little bit to what, also, it's a version of what Bob was saying, which is this, that people don't know where to put their money now if you want to save it. If you want to pass something on to your kids, what do you do? You put it in the stock market, zero interest rates? Well, no. Put it in housing, because actually what's happened since 2007, 2008, we had a housing crisis, but what's been happening to housing property prices recently? Just look at what's been going on in San Francisco, or what's going on here, what's going on in London, what's going on in Paris, what's going on everywhere. It's one of the best places to put your money right now is to indeed buy an apartment in one of these kinds of new buildings, and then maybe, unless it gets like Syria and it gets like Aleppo, you at least have something to hand on to your, it's a source of wealth to hand on to your kids. And this is what's happening. I even saw it in Palestine. I saw it in Ramallah, of all places. You kind of go, this is a major, major trend of what global capitalism is about. And of course, it's interesting that a lot of the value which is being captured right now is in property markets. And guess who we have as the president? Property developer. I mean, wow. This is really, and but that goes back to the question about, is the infrastructure stuff going to work? Well, if it was sensibly done, yeah, it could work like a dream, doing all kinds of things. We certainly need a much better subway system in New York City than we have. But what Trump is going to do is kind of fund mega projects which don't actually improve the quality of life for anybody, and don't improve the productivity of the economy in any way. I mean, this is the kind of thing. And he's going to do it with public-private partnerships, in which a lot of public money will be siphoned over to all his mates in the property development area. I mean, that I'm pretty sure is what he wants to do. But, you know, so again, it's a question of what kind of infrastructure is